So here we go with the intelligent plant. So this week, what we're going to be covering in lecture is how plants communicate with one another and help build communities among them, um, how they relate to plants, other animals, insects, the roots, the mycorrhizal fungi beneath them, and so forth and so on. The quiz that is going to be um, at the end of all of this is going to be based on this PowerPoint as well as the four different videos, namely Plant Neurobiology, Michael Pollan's TED Talk on Plant Eye View, the TED Talk on the secret language of trees, and the TED Talk on how trees talk to one another. So listen to them. With the TED Talks, there's always a box which you can click on after you watch them, which will go into the actual narration. It's called transcript. So when you look beneath the TED Talk, it will say details, transcript, comments, and so after you watch it, hit the transcript, and that will give you a word to word, which will also help you with the quiz. So let's continue with the PowerPoint on the intelligent plant. So are plants smart? I think in the past we would say, yeah, they're smart as far as photosynthesis goes, but are they intelligent? Do they have consciousness, or are they just reacting to the environment? And with these PowerPoints, what I'm going to do is read them first. And then what I do is I discuss the slide. I'm not going to sit there and read the slide to you. But there's a lot of research that now is being done on plants, trees, forest. And we're starting to appreciate that although they don't have brains the way we do, they have a very sophisticated way of being in the world. And one of the big things that plants can do is they can make toxins, they can make poisons, they can make medicines. And these are all of the different types of toxins and metabolites that they can make, from aspirin to opiates. Okay, next slide. There we go. The big thing about toxins and poisons and opiates that the plant makes, they are not poisoned by them. So that's another very smart thing that plants do. They will poison the predator. They are not going to, because plants very much are considered prey, but the prey themselves, the plants, are not poisoned by what they make. Rather, they have made poisons that will kill those organisms that are trying to attack them. Okay, some plants co-evolve with bodyguards. And this is a fascinating area because it means that on some level during evolution, plants had to, in a Darwinian sense, make it profitable to keep them alive. Because remember, plants cannot move. They can't decide to evacuate. They can't decide to move to one part of the forest because the other part of the forest is experiencing gypsy moth. So one strategy has been to make signals that will attract other pests that will attack the invaders. So a good example has to do with lima beans and corn. So they are attacked very often by caterpillars. And when they are, they will emit a signal that can easily be traveling by the air, it's very volatile, to these parasitic wasps. And they have very special receptors so that they can just smell that. And then what the wasps will do is they will travel along that gradient and then reach the lima beans or corn and then attack the caterpillars and kill them, but not attack the lima beans and corn. So it's a very unusual, very sophisticated way of dealing with predators. So the other thing that can happen is when you go into a forest, you're going to see lots of trees. So what if there is a tree that is under attack, and is it going to do something altruistic, like protect the trees that are downwind from them? And the answer is yes. Trees are very altruistic. So a plant or a tree that is under attack will release these volatile signal molecules that can travel on the wind, and the plants that receive that signal downwind, they then can upregulate their toxins, such as tannin, believe it or not, which is a compound in tea that will slow down and perhaps kill the invader as it's starting to munch its way down the food chain of the tree. So that would allow maybe not the tree that got attacked. The tree that got attacked perhaps is going to die because it will totally defoliate that tree. But that tree in its last gasp is going to protect all the other trees that are downwind from it. Very altruistic. Plants don't have brains, and that's a good thing. Okay, right? On one, we'll say one aspect of this is not a good thing in that they can't run away, they frequently get eaten, but if you have a modular design, which they do, they're very fractal, in fact, they're very modular, in fact. So plants can lose up to 90% of its body without being killed. So if a predator comes and eats half the tree or half the plant, because of its modular design, because of its fractal design, it can just continue to replace whatever gets eaten. And that means that although it doesn't have a brain, in the sense it's not processing that information through a central location, but because of the modular nature of the design and how it gets injured, it's easy for it to replace itself. So it's very successful without a brain. Okay, so this goes into the fact that a sessile lifestyle means it can't move. So you're going to have to find out different ways of figuring out how to thrive in an environment where you are constantly under attack. So it says they've evolved 15 to 20 distinct senses, and many are analogous to our five. Smell and taste. These are the chemicals that are in the air or chemicals in the soil. And they have receptors, and they use the receptors the same way that our nose uses receptors to smell and our tongues use receptors to taste. Sight. Now, they actually see various wavelengths that we cannot see, and they certainly do know the difference between day and night. Touch. This is shown in that little video where the two plants are competing to contact that pole and grow up it. So they know, those plants knew when they had found the pole and started to grow up it. And they were relying on their sense of touch. And last but not least, there is the ability for a plant to hear. It's called echolocation. So if it wants a particular, let's say, pole, and you have a lot of, I don't know, other debris around it, they're not going to wrap themselves around a leaf. They're not going to wrap themselves around a rock. They know they're looking for a pole-like structure. So they will reject the rock, and they will reject the leaf, and they will go for the pole. So that, in a way, it's not seeing the way that we see, but they absolutely positively do see and evaluate and make decisions. Okay, so they can learn. There we go. So how does a plant decide? So the plants that you saw in the video, how did they decide in what direction to attach to the pole? And they respond to that pole. They responded to their competitor. One competitor won, one competitor lost. So the loser had to decide that, I mean, how did it decide? It decided because it knew that the other one had made it first. Um, and the big thing right now is that we now realize their time scale is so different than ours. When you look at a plant, it's like, so what? But if you put it on time lapse, then it jumps into life. Then you start to see how it is able to react and decide and make decisions and compete and get rid of predators and this, that, and the other thing. But you have to have time lapse because plants' timeline is so much slower than our timeline. But they're very, very successful on the planet if we're not trying to deforest and things of that nature, but they're very successful. They can do photosynthesis. They can exhibit similar senses, similar decision making that we do, but it's on their time scale, not ours. Okay, plants make drugs. This is another great example of coevolution. All of our drugs before, let's say, World War II, where pharmaceuticals started to figure out how to synthesize something from scratch, they all came from plants and trees. Your aspirin did, your opiates did, other types of chemicals like tannins. Some plants can make cyanide. There is a whole list of plants that in minute amounts are very therapeutic medicinally and in very large amounts are incredible poisons. So things from aspirin to caffeine are all because of plants. And I think that's something, we're a society that just feels like, I don't know if pharmaceuticals came from a chemical company, but all pharmacopoeia come from plants first. All right, plant communication. So this is something quite interesting. Sagebrush is something that you see in the West. And traditionally, they get clipped in the spring because they found that the clipping, now when we do the clipping, we're doing the same thing as maybe an insect might do to start to eat the sage bush leaf. And however, whether you clip it by our clipping it or by an insect clipping it, it stimulates an insect attack and the release of volatile chemicals. And it can actually help the plants, again, downwind, the unclipped neighbors of either sagebrush or other plants in that area. And then their neighbors suffer less insect damage during the seasons. They don't have to be related to sagebrush. This is what I mean by plants are amazingly altruistic. And so forth and so on. I like that the thinking that the sagebrush actually eavesdrops on one another. And there are chemical signals that are species specific, and there are chemicals that are more generalized chemicals that all plants would be able to interact with. So language is something that they have. They know how to talk to each other, same genus and species, but they also have a language that would be understood by other plants and other species in the area. Right? And said, helping out your relatives is a good way to improve the odds that your genes will survive. Okay. The seeing, the echolocation. Look at the video with the two, I think they're pea plants, trying to compete which one is going to make and capture the pole first. So there's going to be a loser, there's going to be, right, a winner. And all the plants were doing was echolocation. On some level, they knew what they wanted to do. And then now we have instruments that are sophisticated and sensitive enough. They are pinging, pinging, pinging. And obviously a ping coming off of a pole is going to sound different. And that's what they're going to aim for. So that is echolocation, how plants can hear. All right, let's get to the forests. Forests are composed of many, many trees, lots of animals in the forest, blah, 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 blah. But we know, and one of the videos goes into experiments with radioactive carbon and how trees that are, again, different, fir tree, birch tree, are able to nourish one another during seasonal differences. So, for example, the fir tree is not going to be that much of a photosynthetic producer in the summer as a birch tree. So the birch helps give carbon, which is the basis of all organic life, to the fir tree. And in the winter, the fir tree will do the same, reciprocate, and give its carbon-based organic molecules to the birch tree, which by now is defoliated and is having a hard time. They do this through the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. This is an incredible network. And the trees are able to do photosynthesis that goes down into the roots. That's going to give the fungi all kinds of nutrients. The fungi are really good at breaking down minerals like phosphorus and sulfur and so forth and so on. And that is something that trees find very difficult to do. So the fungi can feed the plant soluble minerals, and the plant feeds the fungi high energy fuel like glucose. It's now considered to be a wood wide web. But the more that we get into mycorrhizal fungi and the network between the tree and the fungi, we start to realize that it's a very sophisticated type of situation where on some level the fungi know which tree to go to, how much and what to actually deliver to that tree. It's something that we really don't understand yet, but we do see that it is done. So perhaps someone like yourself would be able to figure it out, because it will then reveal a much more complicated, sophisticated way of being on the earth. Okay, so this just gets into the fir tree and the birch tree, and I also want you to watch that TED Talk. There's also an animation TED Talk that is fantastic. I might watch that before I would listen to the woman talk about it. Michael Pollan's talk is fantastic. He actually gets into how it could be applied in farming in the United States. All right, pattern of nutrient tracking. This has a lot to do with our being able to radioactively tag and watch certain nutrients move through a forest. And so this is the last slide. So in conclusion, I am going to read you this. Thus, nodes and lakes in one of these subterranean forest networks with a diagram of the internet, and suggested that in some respects, the plants are actually superior to our internet. Plants are able to create scalable networks, that's fractals, of self-maintaining, self-operating, and self-repairing units, and do it all without a brain. So listen to the other videos, take notes on this, because the quiz is open book. And the other thing is that it will be the basis of some of the questions that will be asked in the next exam, which would be in April. More about that later, and the lab will be posted by tonight. So talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.